what are you doing today to really understand what needs to be repeated, right? What needs to continue on? And how do you identify when something just needs to stop? What is your processes? What are your controls? What are you using from a metrics or KPI standpoint to make you go, yes, 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 I'm going the right direction, or no, 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 I need to stop that? Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about strategic planning, but not just strategic planning, because you guys are getting it left and right everywhere that you're at right now. But I want to actually peel it back besides that theory of, planning and mindset, which is all very important, but I actually want to peel it back a different level. And I want to talk today about analyzing your data so that you know exactly what's working, right? What we want more of, how to repeat more of that, and allowing your data to tell you what's working versus just feeling it through, right? And also being able to identify, what do we need to stop right now? What do we need to stop? What's bleeding? What's hurting us? What do we need to stop right now is what we want to talk about today. And we're going to incorporate that into your New Year's planning and your New Year's strategic analyzing, because, just because there's a new year doesn't mean that we throw everything out, right? We don't want to toss everything out when we built up so much good in our history, right? You've heard the term, you don't want to toss the baby out with the water, right? You don't want to do that. But instead, what we want to do is we want to actually analyze. We want to take a look back at the last year, maybe the other years, and analyze and dissect, what worked and really what was a plain waste of time, right? We want to take it from a data analytical standpoint when we're doing our strategic planning. And I'm curious, what processes do you use right now in your business that helps you identify what's working and what really is a waste of time? What are your current processes? What's in place for you to figure out what's working now and what really isn't working? And what are you doing today to really understand what needs to be repeated, right? What needs to continue on? And how do you identify when something just needs to stop? What is your processes? What are your controls? What are you using from a metrics or KPI standpoint to make you go, yes, 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 I'm going the right direction, or no, 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 I need to stop that? For me, recently, I had a conversation with an entrepreneur that was a prospect that was just kind of talking to me about her business. And I asked her, how was her business going, right? Just asking about her business. And because I was curious about it and I wanted to find out how we could help her. And it was interesting because when she started to speak, right, and I'm listening to what she's saying, I'm listening to her words, she started to tell me how she felt about doing things. And I thought it was interesting that she used that word felt. I feel like this is what I'm doing. And then she started to tell me how she thought that maybe one of her sectors was doing better than the other, almost like it was a gut feeling and gut check, but she wasn't really quite sure, right? And then I asked her about her numbers. Because, I am an accountant and I'm curious about numbers. And I said, tell me about your numbers. Tell me about things like, what was your revenue in 2022, right? Since we're just closing out the year. What are your gross margins? And what was your profit, right? I'm asking about her numbers now because I want to get her out of that intuition, which is good, to some degree, but I want to actually know the data behind it, right? And when I started asking her about her numbers, right, and I started asking her about how she was doing, from this conversation that we were having, I could tell she had absolutely no clue. Like, I was talking about things like construction in progress, and she had no clue what I was talking about. Absolutely clueless. And in fact, I actually had to wait for her to log into her QuickBooks. I actually had to suggest her, why don't we just log into your QuickBooks? Why don't we just look at your data and see what it says, so that she would not have to feel her way through the conversation. And it was interesting because once she logged into her QuickBooks, once she finally logged in, because she had to figure out how to log in, I could tell that she wasn't really used to really maneuvering around it. She was actually surprised to find how she did. She was surprised to find that she had actually hit $7 million in revenue in 2022. But at the same time, she had managed to run a $700,000 loss, literally a $700,000 loss. Like I tell people all the time, I have seen $1 million companies, multi-70-figure companies, even 8-figure companies run at a loss, right? And that's what happens when you're intrinsically feeling your way through business, not looking at the data, right? And that's why it's important to look at the data. And then, of course, I asked the next question that is a natural question when you're talking about business improvement, strategic thinking, right? I asked her, I said, what do you think caused you to run at a loss? What do you think made that happen, that you could have $7 million in revenue and run a $700,000 loss? Like, what was wrong with this picture? What went wrong that made this happen? Was this one particular job? Was this something that happened? What happened that made this happen? And she sat there quietly. And then she told me, Susanne, I have no clue. She said, I have no clue. And as she was telling me she had no clue, I'm going to be honest with you, I was thinking to myself, well, if you got no clue, then, what exactly is driving your loss? If you have no clue about what's driving your loss, we are in some serious trouble here, right? Because that means we can't course correct. We can't fix the situation, right? When it goes off, we can't go and make this better because we can't really figure out where to start if we don't know what's causing your loss, right? And so today, what I want to do is I want to teach you today how to identify what should be repeated, right? Identify what's working for you. And not only that, but I also want to teach you about how to detect things that we need to avoid, how to detect things when things are not going well and how to really find it and how to really fix it. And in the past, we've had very lengthy discussions over the Pareto principle, but today I want to just not just look at Pareto principle. I want to put into place some things that we can do to really fix the situation. So you guys know in the past, we've talked about Pareto principle. We've had lengthy discussions on that. And we talked about how 20% of your activities can actually contribute to 80% of your bottom line, right? We talked about how that can happen. And when we talked about Pareto principle, we talked about how it expands to so many different things in our lives, right? For example, Wilford Pareto, he is the founder, he is the discoverer of the Pareto principle, right? What he found when he discovered Pareto principle was that in Italy alone, he found that only 20% of the population, they owned 80% of Italy's property, right? That 20% owning 80% of their property. For those guys that have multiple cars out there, right? Because, the reality is you can have all the cars you want. You can have all the cars you want in your front lawn. But the reality is you're only going to be able to drive one of those cars at a time, right? And I have to confess, the same thing works for me, right? When I look at my closet, I have all these cute outfits that I've accumulated over the years. But the reality is, I still gravitate towards my favorites, and I have to check myself. I'm like, hey, Susanne, didn't you wear that last week? And weren't you on camera last week? You probably shouldn't wear it this week. I have to tell myself that. And that's the same way it works in business, right? That's the same way it works in business. You probably too have a component in your business or a specific customer or a division that is probably the smallest part of your business. It probably takes the least amount of time, the least amount of your effort, but yet it's driving 80% of your bottom line. And so the question becomes, how do you identify this? How do you identify this? Because the quicker you are at identifying where you want to focus your efforts, where is your most profit coming from with your most ease and flow, right? The faster you're going to be able to create more of those opportunities, right? And we want to create more of those opportunities. We want to create more of that ease and flow and the things that you really like to do that are your most profitable thing, right? And one of the ways that I have found to do this is by tracking through activities or lines of business here. And I have a sample QuickBooks file here that I'm going to open up. So I'm going to share this QuickBooks with you. But this is a sample QuickBooks file. And this is QuickBooks Desktop. It doesn't matter if you use desktop. It doesn't matter if you use online. They really, really work the same. But this is desktop. And this is a sample client. I use construction here as a sample because that's probably the easiest one to kind of track. But you guys also have access to your QuickBooks, right? So if you're working with our accounting team, right, you should have access to your QuickBooks. So make sure you're using it. But if you go into your report section here, what you can do is do a profit and loss by class. And like I said, these are just sample numbers. They're not actually accurate type of numbers, but you can actually look at these numbers and you can go, okay, and in this case, when you're using class, I would use class in terms of things like, this is definitely a little bit different how they're using classes here, but I would look at classes in terms of lines of business. So if I was a construction company or a manufacturing company, I might have a manufacturing line where I'm creating my goods that I sell, right? And I might have a service line. Maybe I repair the goods that I sell if I do like air conditioning. And so what's happening is, I'm able to tell which side is more profitable versus the other is what it's allowing me to do. So you would set up your QuickBooks in order to show classes so that you could dissect and go, yes, I want more of this. No, I want less of this. And what's happening is you're able to track classes by the revenue as well as the expenses that the classes are incurring here. Now, this is a sample file that's in QuickBooks. Obviously, it's probably not the best one to use, but classes, that's one way to do it. And again, I'm using classes to track my service lines, whether it be my actual product sales or my services. If I have locations, like we have some physicians that have multiple locations, I would track by location, which locations are more profitable than the other. Each location would then be a class. Or if I had different divisions, like let's say I sold supplements versus actually doing OB work or seeing patients, I can see where do I have more profitability in this profit and loss by class. Now, the other way that I would track it is through jobs or projects. And again, your QuickBooks will do this too. You, again, just have to set it up, but you can create a profit and loss by job. And what it's allowing me to do is look at each specific job and go, what is my revenue for the job? What are my costs associated with the job? And again, I'm going to use this process if I am like a consultant or if I'm an engineer or construction company, or I have specific customers that I do work for, or if I do project-based work, I'm going to use this. And again, what I'm trying to do is look at where is my profitability based upon my customers. And I'm looking for trends. I'm looking for, who are my leaders, right? And when I say leaders, who are my profit leaders, right? Who is leading in terms of profitability? And who are my loss leaders? Who do I want to avoid? And not just who do I want to avoid, it's usually why do I want to avoid it, right? I want to dig it a little bit deeper. Is it because I'm not pricing it correctly? Is it that I use the wrong estimates? Were they give me the wrong information? How could I course correct so that doesn't happen next time? And I want to deep dive into the trends. And sometimes I'm looking at it because, maybe some of these losses are happening because, for example, in this cottage construction, apparently they didn't do any billing for it, right? They've incurred costs, but they didn't do any billing for it. And maybe they needed to do an upfront collection, right? So that they don't have write-offs in the future. And again, what I'm doing is, I'm looking for the trends. I'm looking at this report. And the other thing that I like to do is I like to look at this report as a percentage of income. I like to look at it as common size. And by common size, I'm looking at every line item as a percentage. Again, what I'm looking for is who has the highest profit margins, right? Who is producing the most profit when I'm looking at this as a percentage of revenue. And that way, when I look at my Pareto principle, I'm looking at percentages as well as dollars, right? To focusing on where I want to go here, right? And I'm looking for, is it a pricing issue for the ones that are not doing very well? Is this something I can course correct? Can I renegotiate these contracts, right? Can I just reprice this to make it better? Because, a lot of times in retail, we're seeing now is cost of goods sold has gone up, but our retailers haven't adjusted their prices yet for the increase in costs that they've occurred. And so how do we make this percentages more in line from client to client, right? Or sometimes it's a staff person or a team member, right? Maybe that you have a team member that's not as efficient as other team member. And so maybe there's some training that's needed, or maybe this is just not their zone of genius. Sometimes it's the entire team, right? It's one division versus another. And so really taking this data and going, okay, what does this mean? Like, I get the gut feeling. Your gut feeling is a great place to start. But what is the data screaming to tell you? What are the numbers telling you with this? And this is where you start with planning your strategic year for 2023, is looking at what's working, what's not, and really honing into that, right? And repeating more the things that you want, right? Going after more of those opportunities and literally stopping the things that are not working or course correcting, right? And again, your numbers, these reports, they're powerful reports. They're telling you critical information. And this information is going to allow you to have the intentional year that you want to do. So definitely, as profit first entrepreneurs, you guys should be having access to these numbers. You definitely want to make sure you have access to these numbers so that you can deep dive and course correct and really learn about this. Okay. But the whole point is always know your numbers. This is not a report that you check once a year. This is a report that you check every single month. It's important to know your numbers. Make sure you know your numbers. And until next time, may the profits be with you.